Hello, good morning, good afternoon, welcome. I'm very pleased to be joined by Joe Seifert. Joe is the CEO of Vertex Hydrogen, which is part of the Essar group, or the Essar Energy Transition part, as it's known, and major project that they're building in the US, US, UK, one of the two major projects in the UK. So welcome, Joe. Thanks for joining me.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. So, you're all going to be speaking actually in the World Electrolysis Congress, but also we have our event coming up in the UK, so hopefully you can join us in that. A lot of work has been going on with Essar. Essar, for people that don't know, is one of the major, I guess, Indian conglomerates that's sort of almost perfect for hydrogen as it deals with oil, shipping, steel, ports, and is a 15 billion-dollar revenue business, if I remember correctly, and one of the major Indian conglomerates and an owner of the big refinery there in Stanslow, is it, in the UK? So maybe if you can maybe unpick the sort of the big picture of the EET and the Vertex project and where you are as we record this in January 2024.
So EET is really the brand name or the umbrella for a very large decarbonisation investment that is owned by SR and brings their sort of, as you say, their background in building massive projects in infrastructure, energy, and elsewhere, and focuses around the Stanslow manufacturing complex, which is where this huge refinery is, second biggest in the UK in the northwest, which is the heart of this HyNet project, which is where one of the first CO2 stores is being developed by E&I, where we also have a hydrogen infrastructure being built or being planned, the hydrogen network, and there's great storage. And we also have a large number of very big industrial customers who their only way of decarbonising is through hydrogen. They can't electrify. And so EET is, if you like, the umbrella name for a host of businesses that will be leading in that energy transition, bringing those skill sets from our Indian shareholder combined with the skill sets and the infrastructure we have at the Stanslow site. And EET Hydrogen is a core pillar of that, and we're the leading hydrogen project in the UK, both really by speed and by scale, which is exciting, and it's a really exciting time for us and EET at the moment.
Yeah, I imagine. And in terms of people maybe not familiar, I guess with the UK, obviously, it's got its own sort of regulatory environment, which is looking fairly robust. What is your take around the environment? I know there was just recently, and just before Christmas, in fact, there's kind of some of the final touches, hopefully. So yeah, what are your thoughts around the regulatory environment? Is it fit for purpose? Are you able to start, putting together the finance for some of the capex that you need to do?
Yeah, so I think the framework in the UK is very advanced, and I think actually very smart. Essentially, what they've done for hydrogen production is to say, actually, on the standard side, forget about colors.
Hmm.
Let's just focus on measuring how much CO2 you're emitting per unit of hydrogen you produce. So let's do science rather than emotions. And therefore, essentially, they've allowed both blue and green hydrogen to progress at pace. And then in terms of the subsidy framework, they're subsidizing producers to be able to sell their hydrogen at the same price as natural gas. So off takers get to buy hydrogen at the same price as gas, which helps solve the demand issue for fuel switching for customers. And that subsidy framework is based on a contract for difference. And that's pretty much copied from the offshore wind framework, where I think £60 billion has been invested in and adjusted for the things that are needed to make hydrogen work. So I think I mean, from my perspective, there's still obviously things that we'd want to tweak and improve, but it's based on an established framework. It's very sensible, very transparent. And we're now seeing the first contracts awarded for hydrogen production, which is a big milestone.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the framework is fantastic. I mean, the challenge of hydrogen in the UK and elsewhere is just we'd like it to go faster and bigger. And obviously, we are constrained to a degree by government funding, and government has a lot of funding needs, not just in the energy space, but elsewhere. And so the framework is fantastic. It's about, pace and scale that really we're pushing government to be a bit bold and go a bit faster.
Mm. I was interested in your comment around adopting the wind successful offshore wind CFDs and just to mention to listeners around your perspective and you bring I think 13 years in investment banking to that perspective, so that finance perspective and taking I guess legislation that the finance industry are comfortable with is a big fillip, is a big sort of bonus in terms of helping to open up private capital markets. Is that right? A right interpretation?
It is, I think. So one of the challenges, these are big infrastructure projects in reality. They need a lot of capital. You need a tried and tested framework that has been through the ringer. So both the borrowing from the CFD is very helpful from offshore wind, but also government has been through many rounds with industry and given feedback and their advisors to tweak it in the right way. So I think actually it's quite a fair, it's not a handout. The projects take a lot of risk. And government actually only pays out if we meet a bunch of requirements around timetables, around making sure the hydrogen is actually low carbon hydrogen. And most things around the project risk are quite rightly held by the project developers. And so it's a good balance for government, but as you say, finance is often about trust. Tried and tested is very valuable for lending banks and equity investors and other in the project. So I think it is and it's been shown to be a highly financeable instrument. And now it's about, I think, probably the next phase is getting the infrastructure up and running. Because what is different with offshore wind is if you make electrons offshore in the UK, most windy days in the North Sea off the Scottish coast, you've got a grid already in place to send those electrons to customers. And the difference with hydrogen is there's currently not an infrastructure in place for hydrogen. So the financing is in place, but there are some risks around hydrogen which are reflect the early stage of production, and that we don't just have a grid we can put our molecules in, we have to find a specific customer. So I think it's a smart setup the way they've set it up. I think over time it will get easier as well as you get hydrogen infrastructure, which will make, and that what I mean by that, you need a network and you need storage.
Yeah.
And I'm less focused about one customer here, one customer there, and I can sell to a marketplace like you do in offshore wind or the gas grid today.
Yeah. And those infrastructures, I mean, I mentioned opening the spigots of private capital, but I guess set within the framework of an energy transition and previous energy transitions, pretty much governments have had to underwrite, have to pay for a lot of the work, I guess, the initial work to build the marketplace. Is that something you see likewise with like capital expenditures in building a hydrogen backbone or a hydrogen network, and vis-a-vis opening up storage facilities for hydrogen, to assume to act as a hydrogen battery to balance the UK grid and also act, I guess, in these geopolitical times as a strategic energy reserve? And is that just going to take lots of capital expenditure? And we are in an age now where governments need to expect it to do that in order to then create I guess, a functioning market. Then can maybe begin to take on more of the finance, but over time.
Yeah, so I think governments recognize that, yes, they do need to step in and support the early industry, as they've done with offshore wind, but they don't need to take the burden themselves. And so actually, there's a slightly different model proposed for hydrogen networks and hydrogen storage.
Yeah.
Partly because they're a different type of asset than hydrogen producers. You can have lots of different producers. You don't want lots of different networks in one region. You're going to have one. So governments, I think, got quite a good toolkit to say this asset looks like a gas grid, and we're going to regulate it and fund it like that. And production looks more like an offshore wind developer, and we'll handle it like that. So they've got the toolkit to manage it. I think the other thing they've done, which I think is smart, is this cluster concept, which really applies to blue hydrogen and industrial decarbonisation, but obviously helps all the hydrogen projects, is to say, let's focus the infrastructure in certain key clusters. And so in the UK, there's 2 clusters selected. We're at the heart of one of them, HyNet. And then you get a lot of economies of scale because you've got lots of projects that can share the infrastructure. And therefore, you really, from government's perspective, you de-risk the investment And you also get the biggest bang for your buck because for one set of infrastructure, you're going to get lots of projects around it. So
Yeah.
government does step in, but actually they've got a pretty good tool. But I mean, for us, we're obviously very keen to make sure that the what we don't want is loads of hydrogen production and no pipes to connect it to customers. So we are keen to push it, but we also have empathy for government because there's somewhat chicken and egg element here, which is you need to start somewhere, and you start with producers, and as that gets bigger, then it will naturally feed a network.
Excellent. In terms of other kind of challenges or things that keep you up at night, if you need anything, I mean I guess around opening up new sort of demand points. I mean you obviously got the refinery in terms of sort of similar shareholders, etc. And other good clients. I think you mentioned the glass works and the other sort of closely located customers. So are they able to sort of begin to buy into buying hydrogen? You also mentioned the contractor difference. There are major obstacles, I guess, to building that demand profile as you see it for maybe the initial stage, and what are your sort of stages in terms of understanding the scale of what you can do now?
Yeah, I mean, demand weirdly. So we don't have a problem with demand. I mean,
Mm,
the estimate is there's about 4 gigawatts of demand in the region, which is conservative. That's from big industrial companies and from some power generation.
mm,
So I think if you tell big industrial companies we can give you hydrogen close to the cost of natural gas, decarbonizes your operation, economics are fantastic, and it makes you the first low carbon chemicals, first low carbon glass manufacturer in the world, and you can potentially sell your product for a premium, that's not an issue. So I've got my problem is I've got large industrial companies shouting at me saying, when can I get it?
okay.
Some of them, you're right, we have locally, we have a very large fabulous glass manufacturer, Essar, and we have the refinery. Both have huge demand for hydrogen, but the rest of the demand we do need a network to connect to.
Yeah,
And so,
okay.
it's not a question of demand. We've got the demand, and people have spent money doing trials and making sure they're hydrogen ready. The question is, when can we connect our supply of hydrogen to them via a network?
Mhm.
But in reality, the first number of the first few plants we got, certainly, the first one will be, as you say, catered entirely by the refinery in Essar, which have huge demand and dwarfs what we're going to be able to produce from the first plants.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, I mean, it's a fascinating project. I'm looking forward to seeing it getting off the ground and yeah, it's obviously a key project for the hydrogen industry in the UK, and it's simply put. So yeah, we wish you all the success. We look forward to hearing more about the EET story and helping you on your journey.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Cheers. Take care, Joe. Many thanks.